Annals of Arithmancy, Chapter 22, The Golden Age of Flight. Disclaimer. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin, and there's no tellin' who that it's namin', although it might be J.K Rowling. 9th of July, 2014. Welcome to the third place match of the 2014 Quidditch World Cup, Ginny announced over the Patagonian Stadium. It had been an incredible opportunity, if probably facilitated by her husband's name, when she was asked to be the English language announcer for the tournament, and the whole family were excited. Most of the old crowd from Dumbledore's army had come to Argentina to see the two final games, too. Early favorite Japan was knocked out by Bulgaria in a 10-hour battle in the semifinals when the Bulgarians staged a miraculous comeback from 250 points behind. My friend and personal arithmancy guru, Hermione Granger, puts very good odds on Japan winning today if the snitch is caught in the first 2 hours. The United States, on the other hand, have been breakout contenders this year, putting up a stunning show before being knocked out by Brazil in a 20-hour defensive grind. Today, these two heavy hitters will be facing off for third place. In contrast to the long, possibly multi-day grinds that Hermione feared, and much of her family were a little too excited about, this match lasted only an hour, and a fast-paced hour at that, with 30 goals scored between the two teams. And consistent with her prediction, Japan caught the snitch and won the game. It was Ginny's comments in one of the timeouts, however, that got Hermione's attention. You know, for all I've talked about our hometown Firebolt Supreme, which was ridden by the Bulgarian team, this has really been a year for innovative new brooms all around the world, with the market finally recovering after the crash in '02. In fact, specialized and experimental broomsticks have undergone a renaissance since the Firebolt Jetstream debuted in '07. For example, the Yajirushi company, which manufactures the Japanese team's broomsticks, has become a world leader in high-altitude broom flight, achieving stable flight far into the stratosphere. And the American Star Sweeper company has taken the Jetstream's high-speed design and run with it. Hermione whirled on Harry on hearing that. Harry, can they really fly in the stratosphere? I thought the technical challenge of flying in air that thin made it impossible. Harry's eyebrows shot up. You mean you don't know, Hermione? He said. They've been doing that for ages in China and Japan. There just aren't any production models that can go that high. They really have been doing a lot of great stuff these past few years. I didn't realize, she said. Have you at least heard about the new games they've come up with? Not much. I haven't been following the innovations in broomsticks, Harry. That's more George's thing, and yours, obviously. Suddenly, Harry showed a manic grin that made her a little nervous. Hermione, you don't know what you're missing, he said. You know, you deserve a holiday after all that work you've done with the Statute of Secrecy. When this is finished, we're taking your family on a tour. Somehow, that didn't make her any less nervous. 11th of July, 2014. The opening ceremony concludes with an interesting Vila Curupira pyramid formation, Ginny said. If several back-to-the-front feet found themselves in the Vila's eyes, the latter have resisted the temptation to transform into the terrifying harpy-like form that gave many children, myself included, nightmares after their 1994 display. And here come the two teams, Brazil in green, Bulgaria in red. This commentary, however, was followed by an obnoxious, noisy-sounding voice that had given Hermione and her family far too much trouble over the years. Almost all of the Weasley family are supporting Brazil, but Hermione Granger is not wearing anything to indicate which team she is supporting. Both her children, Emmy, who appears to have inherited her father's unfortunate hair, and Robin, who has his mother's bushy locks, are decked out in green. Does she secretly hope to see her old friend Crumb take the trophy at last? Or is this the kind of diplomatic neutrality one might expect of a ruthless careerist who has thrown our world into chaos over the past 2 years with her reckless and aggressive campaign to repeal the Statute of Secrecy, and whose long-term ambition is undoubtedly to become supreme mugwump with the help of Muggle allies? "Oh, Merlin, who invited her?" Hermione said. "This was supposed to be Ginny's big day." "She had connections," Percy said.
"She had blackmail material," Harry grumbled. "Ginny's livid. I'll bet you 10 gallons she hexes Skeeter before the match is over."
"I'm not taking that bet," she told him. "That's fixed betting. You're in her head. Besides, I've half a mind to hex Skeeter myself. Ruthless careerist, indeed. I've never even had a full-time job." "Just try and enjoy the game, dear," George said. The game lasted a little less than 3 hours, and it was an exercise in patience for the Weasley clan. Hermione was pretty sure Rita Skeeter didn't make a single comment that was actually about Quidditch, and directed all of her attention to what Dumbledore's army was doing. She was far too interested in their personal lives, and Ginny had to stop her several times when her speculations started to cross the line. At least the kids had fun that day. Emmy and Robin were too young to really be bothered. Harry's boys were too absorbed in Quidditch, and Sasha and Nadia, she hated to admit it, but Skeeter was right that they spent an inordinate amount of time snogging. Hermione did remember being 16, but she had been a little preoccupied with the war in Umbridge that year. In the end, Victor, who had come out of retirement at 38 to try to win one more time, caught the snitch to win the match 170-60 in a victory that would surely go down in history. Unfortunately, Skeeter was still at it. "Ah, that's better. People are calming down. I can now see the VIP boxes. Well, Dumbledore's army seems to approve of the victory. Harry Potter in particular seems emotional. With a determined grin on his face, George Weasley conceals his inevitable annoyance. Young Bill is applauding, doubtless at the prompting of his publicity-hungry father. My colleague, Ginny Potter, is approaching me, no doubt with another tedious correct—" There was a yelp and a thud over the microphone, and a simultaneous guffaw from Harry, and then Ginny's voice came back on. "Rita Skeeter has been taken unaccountably ill with what some are calling a jinx to the solar plexus." That drew laughs from pretty much the entire British audience. "As celebrations continue here in the Patagonian desert, we at the Daily Prophet sincerely hope that you have enjoyed our World Cup coverage from Argentina. Next week, the National Gobstones League comes to Birmingham, but in all honesty, don't bother." 28th of July, 2014. "It is an honor to meet you, Patal-san and Glangel-sensei," the wizard from the Yajirushi Company greeted Harry. "We hope your stay in Japan has been pleasant for you and your families."
"Excellent as always, Yajirushi-san, thank you," Harry said. "I wanted to show my family around after we saw your brooms perform in the Quidditch World Cup. Hermione's really interested in your ultra-high altitude flying."
"We would be delighted for you to witness our next test flight of the Iteza," he replied. "Come and see." If the Firebolt Jetstream looked like a parody of a broom, the Yajirusha Iteza looked like something Hermione's 6-year-old daughter might have drawn and called a super broom. It had a brush cap like some Muggle brooms, though it bore only the barest resemblance even before it flared out into long stabilizing fins. It had handlebars at the front, though they were more like the grips of a scythe than those of a bicycle. And the ironwork was designed to run all the way along the rider's legs for support, not just their feet. It also had a visibly shimmering air shell that completely enclosed it except for the fins. "Wow, that looks really cool!" Emily squealed, confirming Hermione's suspicions. "How high does it go?" The broom maker chuckled. "Our last test flight reached 99,000 feet. We're hoping to improve on that." George whistled, impressed. Harry seemed to be trying to count up to make sense of how high that was. "Whoa, that's got to be close to space," Bill exclaimed. "Not really. Outer space is defined as 328,000 feet, Hermione said. "It's still up there with the highest aeroplanes, though." "It looks weird," James said, voicing what several had been thinking. "James!" Ginny scolded. "I mean, it's cool and all," the boy tried to save it. "It's just, it doesn't look much like a broom anymore."
"Oh, I don't know, I think it does," Harry said. "Maybe it's like calling a Ferrari a—"
"A horseless carriage," Hermione suggested.
"Yeah, that. It's technically correct, isn't it?
I suppose so. So, I'm not familiar with this ultra-high-altitude broom technology, she said. How does it work? They work much like normal brooms, in principle, Glangel-sensei, the broom maker said. Much of the work has historically been done by China. They were first to fly a broom to the summit of Mount Everest in 1948. But in recent years, we have put more effort into it here. This bloom looks so different because we had to keep adding features as we pushed to higher altitudes. For example, above 30,000 feet, the bloom requires special materials to work properly because the air is so cold and dry. But that has been known for a long time. We had to add the air cell at about 40,000 feet because even a pure oxygen bubblehead charm is too thin to breathe. That stopped us for many years. We had to add the fins at 60,000 feet because the air is too thin that it can't keep the bloom from rolling at those speeds. The fins extend farther as the bloom goes up, but we're struggling to get them to work above 90,000 feet.
Harry looked confused, though. Don't Muggle rockets have fins that work higher up, though? He said. He tried to think. I mean, what about the space shuttle?
Hermione shook her head. The space shuttle went a lot faster than any broomstick, Harry. When the air's that thin, wings will only stabilize you at very high speeds. In fact, I don't think Muggles have any data on low-speed flight at those altitudes. Muggle craft can't really be good at both hovering and forward motion.
Can't you get up to really high speeds in air that thin, though?
Not as fast as you think. Power in level flight is proportional to speed cubed, so even very thin air puts up a lot of resistance as you go faster. At 100,000 feet, a medium performance broom won't be able to get above 200-250 miles an hour. Even a jet stream wouldn't get much past 500 if it could fly that high. The Ateza is rated at 215 miles per hour, the broom maker confirmed. That is an additional challenge. But now, if you like, you can watch our next test flight. The test pilot, in stark contrast with Hermione's Muggle biases, was a small witch named Noriko Sato, the seeker for the Japanese Quidditch team, who was joined by a ground controller, Kayano. The British visitors were surprised when she put on a Muggle headset and something like a flight suit with a small oxygen bottle attached to her back. Muggle radios, Kayano explained. The only thing that really works for communication under these conditions. A large telescope was brought out to track Sato in the air, and they saw she was attaching a magical flare at a strategic point on the broomstick. The company even had a dedicated translator come out to explain to the visitors and a handful of reporters what was happening. By the time everything was set up, Sato was already in the air, but that was no matter. The flight would take a while anyway. Final check at 15,000 feet, Sato relayed through the translator. All spells are working normally. I'm beginning my ascent. It took half an hour for Noriko Sato to ascend to 90,000 feet. The broom was theoretically capable of climbing much faster, but they didn't want to push it. It was mostly uneventful, though they could track her through the telescope with the help of her flare. She also reported when the oxygenated air shell began registering a pressure difference, and when she extended the stabilizers. It's beautiful up here, she said when she reached the hold point. Every time, I can see nearly all of Honshu from here. Everything looks good here, Kayano-san. The broom is stable. I'm ready for my final ascent run. Roger, Sato-san, Kayano replied. We still have you in view here. You are cleared for final ascent. They watched in the telescope as she began climbing again, moving faster and steeper than before. She would have been invisible were it not for the flare, trailing smoke behind her in the thin air, blurred and wavering to the eye from the turbulence. The magical telescope kept her in view as she flew higher, and Kayano patiently called out the numbers. 95,000 feet, 98,000 feet, 99,000 feet, 100,000 feet. The Japanese spectators cheered even as the translator relayed the number. The first broom flight over 100,000 feet. This was an historic event, and she was still going. Controlling the broom is getting harder, Sato reported as she passed 102,000 feet. I can keep it pointing forward, but it keeps wobbling. Okay, take it easy, Sato-san. We don't want to lose the broom. I won't lose the broom, Keanu-san, but I'm losing stability. I'm rolling. I'm in ballistic flight. The view through the telescope showed Sato spinning and then tumbling on the broom as she arced through the air, completely out of control, with the air too thin to slow her down. Do something! The kids yelled as they watched. Can't we help her? Pull in the stabilizers, Keanu shouted. They'll snap off in a spin like that. I did, she shouted. I'm trying to stabilize the broom before we lose the twigs. Ventus isn't steady enough. Ventus is no good in a near vacuum. Not enough control. Try Augmenti. A smoke screen charm, Hermione exclaimed. Something in the air to produce drag without blowing all around. Or no, a fog charm, Keanu made the connection. Try Nebulous. A pause. It's working, Sato reported. I'm level, but falling. I think the broom's in one piece, though. The spectators cheered again. That was one of the more harrowing things Hermione had seen in a long time, and she could tell the Potters were all on the edges of their seats, too. As Sato spiraled down, Keanu reported the results. Your peak height for controlled flight was 103,200 feet. Your peak overall was 105,700. Hermione was duly impressed. That was over 20 miles, nearly all of it controlled, and in many ways better than Mugglecraft could perform. The Yajirushi Company was definitely going places. That was a close one, Keanu said, however, then added to the visitors. We're trying to outdo Muggle balloons, but I fear that will take entirely new techniques. What's the Muggles' record? Asked James. 128,000 feet for manned balloons, 174,000 feet for unmanned. It was very impressive all the same, Hermione said. It was almost like a SpaceX rocket launch, watching it like that. Ooh, 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 Emmy squealed, hopping up and down. Could you go to outer space on a broom, Mummy? Could you? Into space? She said. I don't know, Emmy. With the right spells you could probably get to space, but getting into orbit so you'll stay there is a lot harder. I'll bet you could do it, Mummy. Yeah, you can go to space, Robin agreed with her. Hermione chuckled and ruffled Emmy's hair. If I ever have a spare decade to work on it with Elon Musk, maybe. And actually, I have no idea if magic works the same in space. Everyone stopped and stared at her. Wait, what? Ginny said. Why wouldn't it? George asked. I mean, we'd have access to our own magic, I'm pretty sure, she clarified. But, well, it's not proved, but the consensus is that magic is generated by life, and once you leave Earth's biosphere, you might lose access to the ley lines. Anything that's powered by them, and you'd probably need ley line power to get to space with magic. Blimey, George said. To think that there could be places where magic just doesn't work. Do you think you could test that? She shrugged. Once the statute of secrecy is repealed, I'm sure we could send something up to test it. Are you going to be an astronaut, Mummy? Emmy said excitedly. She shook her head. No, I don't think so. I'm happy enough keeping my feet on the ground for now. I want to be an astronaut. Don't worry, Emmy, George said, laughing. Once you're old enough, we won't have a statute of secrecy, and I'm sure they'd love to have you. 9th of August, 2014. The Potters and the Granger Weasleys made another trip to Australia on their tour, but this time they were in the northern part of the country, far enough north that the land was green, though still nearly uninhabited. They were joined by 24 Australian witches and wizards on a large grassy field. They hadn't made a revolutionary new broom here. Rather, this was the home of a new broomstick game Harry wanted to try out. The two teams were kitted out with an alarming number of firebolt jet streams and other similar new racing brooms. This is Kakadu, Harry said, the place and the game. And what is Kakadu? Hermione said. One of the Australian wizards stepped forward to explain. After you two wrote your paper saying that new brooms are too fast to be useful for Quidditch, we decided to try to create our own variant of Quidditch that would work at higher speeds. This is what came out of it." He motioned around the field. The pitch marked out for Kakadu was 4 times as long as a normal Quidditch pitch and over 6 times as wide, 2,000 feet by 1,000. It was large enough that a good player could fly as fast as they could tolerate the wind speeds if they had a powerful enough broom. They'd done some things to make the game more like rugby. Notably, the Quidditch hoops were replaced by a large goal net. But other things were completely alien, like how all of the players seemed to be armed with something like lacrosse poles. "The Quitch is too big to throw a quaffle around," they explained. "It'd be faster to fly with it, so we added the poles to throw it faster. All the balls are 6 inches across to make them easier to handle, and we upped the team size to 11 to get better coverage of the pitch, even though it makes it hard to get enough people together." As they went into the details, Hermione saw how complex the game had become. The quaffle was still scarlet red, but much smaller. So were the bludgers, and the snitch, wingless, was enlarged to be the same size. Even so, all the positions had different types of poles. The seeker's pole was the most like a lacrosse pole, but bigger, with a net sized for the larger snitch on the end. The chaser's poles had large scoops on the ends for slinging the quaffle around at high speeds, like in Jai-Alai. To get the quaffle off a chaser who had it scooped up required a sort of mid-air jousting that looked more dangerous than those bludgers at those speeds. As such, there were strict rules about contact with another player, even more so than in Quidditch. Only pole-to-pole contact was allowed. As for the bludgers themselves, they weren't iron, even hollow, like in Quidditch. Instead, they were made of rubber because even that was dangerous enough at those speeds. There were also 3 of them, since 2 just wasn't enough for 11 a side. At least with the toe loops, it was much harder to knock someone off the newest generation brooms. The beaters also had scoops on their poles, but with bat-like counterweights on the other ends. The keeper had something that looked like a double-ended tennis racket. They'd changed the offside rule for Kakadu too, or George said it was the anti-stooging rule, but it was basically an offside rule. Quidditch had a very simple rule. Only 1 chaser may enter the scoring area at a time. But with a larger pitch and 6 chasers, they changed it to say that the offense may not have more players in the scoring area than the defense. But the most innovative change, and the one Hermione most wholeheartedly approved despite Harry's objections, was to radically change the snitch game. The larger snitch was easier to catch in Kakadu, even with the larger pitch, so catching it was only worth 30 points. But to end the game, the seeker had to score a goal with the snitch. They could pass it to the chasers, but the seeker had to make the shot. If the team lost control of the snitch, it was released to be caught again, not turned over, and the snitch goal was worth 75 points, which had the effect of eliminating draws. "The league's still too small to be dealing with draws," they said. "We might change it later." "So now that you know the rules, do you want to try joining us for a pickup game?" the Darwin captain said. "Yes, please," most of Hermione's family exclaimed. "No thanks," Hermione said. "I can barely stand Quidditch at normal speeds. This is way too fast for me." "Aw, come on, Hermione," Ginny said. "You could play keeper." No, besides, I need to keep an eye on the kids." "Can't we play, Mummy?" Emmy said. "You have to be taller to ride those jet streams, Emmy." "But I can ride a comet," she pleaded. "Absolutely not. This is a more dangerous game than Quidditch. I'm not letting you near it until we make sure your father doesn't get himself killed." George laughed. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, love," he said, but he was still smiling. "Any time, dear," she told him, smiling back. After much begging, it was decided that 12-year-old James could play keeper on his own Nimbus broom, since he was sure he could make the house team at Hogwarts this year and wanted the practice. Lily was only Emmy's age and was sidelined, but Bill was feeling the most left out, so Harry and Ginny ultimately told him he could play keeper next if James came out of it okay. Hermione and the remaining 4 children watched on comets from the sidelines as the 2 teams squared off. The pitch was so large that she needed binoculars to follow the game properly, but it was surprisingly entertaining. The larger teams and the improved snitch game made for a more dynamic and interesting sport by her Muggle standards, compared with the frankly lopsided Quidditch. Bill was eventually switched in, and one of the Australian players offered to watch the kids for a while so Hermione could try her hand at playing keeper. It was less terrifying than she expected, even though she got flattened by Ginny. Emmy and Robin thought it was pretty cool anyway. 20th of August, 2014. In the deserts of New Mexico, in a region that was once a Muggle bombing range, at least Hermione hoped it was a former bombing range, the American Broomrights were testing their own latest creation. "The Star Sweep Special," a Texan witch said proudly. This broom wasn't as alien-looking as the Ateza had been, but it still looked pretty over-engineered. It had a brush cap that extended all the way down the bristles to protect them, and was flared at the end in such a way as to cut down on turbulence. It had a nose cone, of sorts, a double cone-shaped bulge at the front that anchored a very pointed air shell charm. And, most interestingly, it had ankle straps rather than toe loops to support the rider's legs, making it necessary to ride completely prone, as opposed to halfway like on a jet stream. This time, the setup looked like something out of that Muggle show, Mythbusters. They were in a shielded shed near the test course in case the broom went off course, with a pair of binoculars set up to take a high-speed recording of the broom to measure its top speed. The rider was suited up much the same as Narito Sato, but without a radio headset. Not a Quidditch player this time either, at least not nationally. They said his experience was in riding Thestrals. The test flight was less dramatic than Sato climbing up to 105,000 feet, but it was bloody fast. The Star Sweeper Special flashed by in a blink, pulling an impressive wake behind it and kicking up a lot of dust. "Looking good out there, Fontaine," the Texan witch said when the rider returned. "That was 340. Fontaine was a bit disappointed, though. "Phew, needs a bit more oomph then," he said, also in a Texan accent, as he took off his 1920s aviator hat and scarf. "We're shooting for 370 or Mach .5. Still needs some work." "Unfortunately, we're nearing the limits of what can be done with fixed charms," his ground controller said. "We're actually considering runic batteries that can be swapped out. Might be the only way we can go supersonic." "Oh, like a Muggle fuel tank?" Hermione said interestedly. "More like an afterburner with the amount of energy they consume." "We'll get it yet, though," Fontaine insisted. "Good of y'all to come," he told the visitors. "Mr. and Mrs. Potter, I saw you back in your stunt-flying days. Made me want to try my hand at it." Harry's face lit up, as it always did when someone recognized him for his achievements outside of the war. "Glad to hear it, Mr. Fontaine," he said. "You looked pretty good out there." "Thanks. So, you must have heard about the quadrangle game against California on Saturday. You guys interested in joining in?"
"Oh?" Harry said in surprise. "I mean, if it's all right, if it's state versus state."
"No need to worry about that, Mr. Potter. The team sizes aren't nailed down yet anyway. We've just been going with whoever shows up." 23rd of August, 2014. The reason the team sizes weren't nailed down yet in Quadrangle was because the game was huge. So huge that it wasn't possible to have a league in the traditional sense. Not enough full-time players. Hermione thought it resembled a military exercise more than a sport, and indeed it bore a strong resemblance to a huge game of capture the flag. The field of play was a full square mile. The prize was a large golden ball called the MacGuffin, and the goal was to take the other team's MacGuffin and bring it back to your base. The teams were about 40 apiece, disproportionately teenagers who were into that kind of thing. In scale, it was as if everyone 4th year and up at Hogwarts from Gryffindor and Slytherin all got together for one giant scrimmage, and according to Fontaine, teams were usually formed ad hoc except for the largest states, since the game was still in its infancy. It only got wilder from there. The American broom game of Quadpot used a quad, which was a quaffle that was charmed to explode after a set period of time. In Quadrangle, however, each team had 10 quads that would release a small explosion on impact an unlimited number of times. Helmets and ear protection spells were mandatory. A fixed number of defenders were tasked with tagging the quads with small balls with neutralizing charms on them, which would knock them out of the game. From what she'd heard, they'd been experimenting with other oddities too, like not being allowed to touch the MacGuffin with your hands, or even allowing certain limited spells on the field. Hermione was glad they didn't do any of that today, since it was already complete chaos. Yet, from the chaos emerged a pretty good military-style strategy. Fontaine would have done well in the war, she thought. In the end, Texas won with the help of the Potters and Granger Weasleys, and after a long, rough day, they were ready to head back home.